Hello and welcome to the sixth annual African American Film Series put on by Communities First Inc. We're so thrilled to have a fabulous panel here with us today and to have you all watching. We are going to be discussing the film John Lewis, Good Trouble. And I think there are some of us who have already gotten into some good trouble, and then there are probably some of us out there that haven't and need to. So we are going to start out today with just doing some quick introductions. So I'm Essence Wilson. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Communities First. And I remember the first year that we were doing the African American Film Series, and we weren't sure if it would be a hit. Then we had 5 wonderful years. We got to this season, and we're dealing with COVID, and we were able to successfully switch to an online format. So thank you to all of you who have signed up to view the film, who are watching right now, who will watch the replay. We greatly appreciate your participation and for helping us to keep this annual tradition going. So we'll hear from Jasmine McKinney first. Can you give us a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure, Essence. Thank you all for having me this afternoon. My name is Jasmine.
Jasmine, we're not able to hear you.
You can't hear me?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry about that. All right. My name is Jasmine McKinney. I am a lifelong resident of the city of Flint. I am currently the program manager for the Regional Procurement Technical Assistance Center, assisting small businesses with securing government contracts. And I'm active in the political scene. So more so in advocating for people voting.
All right, I'll introduce myself. I'm Glenn Wilson, President and CEO of Communities First Inc. Here in the city of Flint, and also we have an office in Detroit. We love doing the work that we're doing here in the community. I'm so excited to be here. It's always good to find opportunities and ways to get into some good trouble. So I'm very excited about the conversation and the the cross sectoral of experiences that we have here today. I think is going to be very dynamic as far as the information that you'll be receiving today about the
film. Yeah, I'm Dale Reed from Alabama. I'm a retired teacher. I worked with the Teachers Union of Alabama for 47 years. I'm glad to be on the program, and I'm chairman of the Alabama Democratic Conference, the Black Political Democratic Caucus of Alabama.
I'm Reverend Gwendolyn Cook Webb, also from Birmingham, Alabama. I became the second Black female cop here in Birmingham, Alabama, and that was the most racist city in Alabama. I am presently the founder and CEO of Foot Soldiers International, which I am one of the foot soldiers. And I'm just happy to be here, be a part of this panelist group, and I'm very happy that I was invited to be a part of this. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be here to Glenn and Essence and to the esteemed co-panelists. Such an honor to be sitting alongside all of you. My name is Orlando Bailey. Born and raised in the city of Detroit, I serve as the Director of Engagement for Bridge Detroit. We are a new journalism and engagement organization here in the city that's getting ready to turn 1 year old in May. I moonlight as a facilitator and host of the Urban Consulate. It's a network of parlors all around the country where we convene people to have critical conversations about cities. And I'm also founder and co-host of the Authentically Detroit podcast. And so always in the discourse of what's happening currently, politically, and within pop culture. And so my speech and my journalism is my activism.
All right, thank you all for introducing yourselves. I think the first thing that we should start with is just your reflections and your thoughts on who was John Lewis. And we'll start with Mr. Reed, if we could. Who was John Lewis?
Okay, John Lewis was a native Alabamian from the county of Pike County, where Troy is located. John Lewis got involved in the civil rights movement early in his life. He wanted to attend Troy University, but at that time, because of racism, he could not attend, so he went to Fisk University. He was one of the founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that we founded in Easter weekend in 1960. So you could tell I'm an old man, kind of like John Lewis was. John Lewis and I were there in Raleigh, North Carolina, when we founded SNCC. John stayed active on the front line in politics, close to Dr. King and many other in the civil rights movement. I got to know him very well. And of course, he was on Edmund Pettus Bridge when the time they were trying to get the right to vote in Dallas County and really in the Black Belt, pretty much throughout Alabama. There were some counties where blacks didn't have a problem in those days getting registered to vote, particularly veterans. But in the Black Belt, whatever they were against everything black. That the Black progress, it was everything that they opposed, they being whites. Seldom, if ever, and most times never could you find a white that was receptive to trying to deal with blacks or help blacks to move forward. John Lewis stayed active. Then, of course, he ran for Congress, as we know, and won the election, defeated a very prominent, a very active, and a very good man. He defeated Julian Bond. Some of you might not know, but Julian Bond was very active and became known in 1968 in Chicago during the Democratic National Convention when he headed up a delegation to challenge some of the Democratic leaders in Georgia, like we did in Alabama and some other places, because blacks could not, we were just shut out. Some of you might not know it, and I'll stop with this. The Democratic Party was founded over 150 years ago for blacks, for whites, by whites. And it stayed that way until 1945. In a case called Smith versus Allwright, the United States Supreme Court ruled that you could not keep blacks from participating in the Democratic primary because the Southern whites said that the Democratic Party was a private organization, and therefore they could keep anybody out they wanted to. They kept blacks out. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You got to let blacks vote in the primary, because the primary is where you make your really decisions. Because at that time, the Democratic Party the South was a one-party state, and it was a Democratic Party. Republican didn't have a chance in Alabama in those days, but things are switched now. And so pretty much that's John Lewis was a drum beater. He was the type of guy that you could call John. John was not one of the guys who, after he got elected, you couldn't reach him. You could reach John. You could talk to John. And John was the kind of person that would help anybody that he could. And I'm just so glad that I hate he died before it happened, but I'm glad that the people of Georgia voted to put 2 Democrats in the United States Senate, a black and a person of the Jewish faith. I know John Lewis smiled in his grave when that happened. I know Herman Talmadge walked around his grave cursing when it happened, because of the time that it was a revelation. And it was a thing that John Lewis had fought for. And John Lewis believed fundamentally that the vote was the key thing to making change in the South and in this country. I'll stop there.
And I'll ask the same question to Jasmine. How would you describe John Lewis?
Oh, Essence, I have to follow Dr. Reed. I would say so much has been said, but when I think of John Lewis, I think of a legend, a hero, someone who I liked what Dr. Reed wrapped up with about him being accessible. And also, I would also just say that he was a drum major. Dr. King talked about being drum majors, and John Lewis carried that baton until his death. So we have a lot of work to do in our community.
So as we think about him as a drum major and we think about the role that he played in the civil rights movement, just curious, have any of you participated in a protest or in a march? And I'll ask that question of Orlando.
Yes, absolutely. Grew up on the east side of Detroit and was a part of an organization that I ended up working for as a young person, but ended up starting my career there after college, East Side Community Network. And as a young person coming up through that youth program, it was called Youth and Age of Greatness. We were led and taught, tenets of activism. We were led to speak up when we knew that injustice was taking place. The east side of Detroit has many different neighborhoods, many different types of architecture, but one of the things that is a glaring miss on the lower east side of Detroit is a space where young people can recreate, right? And so my first march came around 12 or 13 years old when the county wanted to close the only water park that was in the city of Detroit. They wanted to close it for budget reasons and didn't want to allocate money to continue to fund the park. And we marched on the water park. We marched on the county and held a press conference, and news showed up. I was quoted in the paper for the first time advocating for recreation on the east side against the wishes or the plans of the Wayne County executive at that time. And I didn't know at 12 and 13 years old that would be sort of the bedrock and the foundation for the work that I would lead later on in life. But it was ingrained in me from a little child at 12 and 13 years old, advocating for recreation against the system.
So you talked about that advocacy and being involved in marches as youth. And when I had a chance to read about Reverend Webb, I found out that she was a part of the 1963 children's marches in Birmingham. And I'm just really curious, what inspired you to get involved? And then how did that impact your journey in life?
Thank you so much again for having me. And what I got involved simply because my grandmother, she had said that when I came into the world, at that time, and Mr. Reed can tell you, when we were born, they would spank us on our rear ends to get the oxygen into our lungs. But she said I didn't have to be spanked because I came into the world looking around, and she knew that the world was in trouble because I came with my eyes shining like black diamonds. But what impacted me was to hear this powerful man of God, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, hear him speak with such power and wanting people to be involved. And at 16th Street Baptist Church, I'll never forget that day when we were there as young people, because we always stayed involved, and to hear him begging for people to come on board. See, so many things had occurred at that time. A lot of homes had been bombed, even his brother's home, A.D. King. And he asked with so much force, who will go with me on this last leg in Birmingham, Alabama? And we heard the plea as youth, and he dropped his head in the lock of his shoulders. He was so exhausted. But when he raised his head up again, what he saw was us, the children in Birmingham, Alabama, wanting to be a part of what had been going on and what was going on. And it was just knowing that we could do something, and I wanted to continue to be a part of doing something, not just filing in an office, but to get out there and become a part of. And that is one of the things that made me want to become a part of it at that young age of 14 years of age. But to be able to make a change. Birmingham needed to change. And I wanted to be a part of that change, even at that age. And I haven't stopped. We're still doing things here in Birmingham, Alabama, but just like like John Lewis, even at that time in '63, it was a peaceful protest, nonviolent protest, until Bull Connor and the police and the firemen made it violent. But we still did not fight back because we were instructed that way. So the movement has been a great thing for me. It helped me to grow up. And if you have not seen it, if any of you have not seen the documentary, Mighty Times, the Children's March, that won an Academy Award, but it is a fantastic, I use it when I travel all over the country as a part of the teaching tools that we use for nonviolent movements.
Thank you for that. And I think you alluded to a few things there in terms of the strategy and the intentionality with these marches. You said that you received training, and then I read that that they sent the children in groups of 50 so that it wasn't clear how big of a crowd there would be. So there was just some real intentionality and some real strategy that was involved in making this impact. And then, of course, being nonviolent, if the people who are being attacked are being nonviolent in response, it certainly, I'm sure, drew much more attention in a very, very different way than it would have if there had been fighting going back and forth. Because then at that point, it's easy to blame somebody, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you for offering that. I'm going to ask the next question of Glenn. One of the things that was said in the film that John Lewis says, when you lose your sense of fear, you are free. And I'm just curious, are we free today or are we afraid?
That is a very powerful question. Are we free or are we afraid? I really think it just depends on where a person is in their life. I think sometimes there is fear that comes from a place when people don't know how powerful they are, right? And if you don't know how powerful you are, and I think it also comes from a place of people telling you that you should be fearful, right? Because you grow up that you don't want to say this or you don't want to do that, because if you do that, there's going to be repercussions. And what I liked about the film is that when John Lewis was talking about getting necessary trouble and good trouble, I think there is a thought process now behind what is good and necessary trouble, right? And how do we actually address those in an equitable way? Because the way that they responded then, they respond differently now, or the way people respond is a little bit different. So me personally, I try to be as free as possible, right? To make sure that the words that I say or the actions that I take are unencumbered, right? To a place that where you actually have full liberation in who you are as an individual and can stand on being comfortable with being that I'm a Black man. This is how it is in America. These are the struggles that I have. These are the things that I'm doing to address those things. And I think sometimes a lot of things don't happen because people fear of the unknown and the things that might actually impact their voice. Whereas that's where the control comes from, is like letting the fear control people as an individual, right? And I think if we, liberate ourselves or free ourselves to have more freedom of speech, I think we would have an idea of, I think we will see more change happen in our communities, in our own lives, if we don't let fear dictate it. So are we free? I believe there are some that are free, and then I believe some don't even know they're free. But the fear has controlled them. So that's that's a very, I can keep going on that actually, but I'm stop.
So let's talk a little bit about voter suppression. And so I heard John Lewis in the film say that there are forces that want in America today that wanted to take us back, but we're not going back. We're going forward. And Stacey Abrams said, "Your voice matters. If it didn't, they wouldn't be trying to shut you up." And so I'm just curious, Mr. Reed, if you could share with us some of the voter suppression tactics that were used, in the early days to prevent people, particularly people that were lower income and minorities, from voting.
You got to unmute Dr. Reed. There you go.
You had a literacy test, and the literacy test couldn't be passed because the person that graded the test was not going to let you pass it. How many bubbles in a bar of soap? That was one question that was asked often. There were other methods. Fear. There are plenty of people died trying to get the right to vote. We talk about this issue of fear. Now today, it's more acceptable. We still have opposition, very strong opposition. But it's not the kind of opposition we had in the early days. Because in the early days, the government had the laws of segregation. We hadn't passed the 65 Voting Rights Act. We hadn't passed the 64 Civil Rights Act. There were several Supreme Court decisions that had not been handed down. But there were some things that allowed the segregationists to keep you from voting because he was using the law. And this is the thing I appreciate about John Lewis. John Lewis, yes, and we all knew when we had the city, but everything was just segregated. That's fundamental. And the law provided for that. Even though the 1964 Supreme Court decision had come down in the Brown versus the Board case, that was very much alive, very much around. But good heavens, the South didn't pay any attention to that law. They just defied that law and arrested people. And then in many cases, people were put off the lands where they worked and where they had worked many, many years. So every method, as Lyndon Johnson said, every method the human ingenuity could conceive was used to keep folks from having the right to vote. So we got that 1965, the stampede on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, that flash that went across the news nationwide in a 30-second flash, more than a minute, but showing the world that people being beaten. America had to do something because white America got mad about that. I'm just going to digress just a little bit here. In the case of Floyd, that just died, it's so unfortunate that this man died like that. But what came out of that, Floyd's death, showed white America, because they saw it on television. They saw this white policeman on this man's neck, killing him while trying to breathe, begging for help. And white America saw that. This time you ain't got to listen to you or listen to me. They saw it. And then America said, we got to do something. White America got to do the same thing was in Selma, Alabama. When they saw that, the police, the state troopers from Alabama, beating these people, beating the black folk. When they saw that, then when Dr. King called on the white clergy, so, you got to come out of your nest. You got to come out of your closet. America's messed up. America has a problem. When white America and Martin King and everybody witnessed what was happening to black people in the South, then the Congress said we had to move. And Lyndon Johnson wound up passing this law, the Voting Rights Act, and saying we shall overcome. That was it. But it was the sheer courage of John Lewis and others that demonstrated, yes, you had a bad law, we're going to break the law, and we're going to suffer the consequences. That's the thing about a bad law. If the law is bad, you break it. But you got to be prepared to suffer consequences. That's why we go to the Birmingham jail. There's so many other things we could talk about. But fundamentally, it was the courage. It was the courage. And Martin King was so articulate, he could convey to America and to the world how it was morally wrong what you're doing. What you're doing. But now don't forget, it's not over. I mean, as we speak this hour, I have said, and I'll stop with this, I've said that the only difference between Mr. Segregation, who is now dead, but he left a son back there called Mr. Discrimination. And while Mr. Segregation wore his sheet over his suit, Mr. Discrimination wears his suit over his sheet.
Wow, that is a powerful statement. Wow.
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna talk no more. I think I'm just done for the day.
Wow. I want to give Jasmine and Orlando the opportunity to respond to some of the things that Mr. Reed said about voter suppression. Also, that final comment about segregation and now entering into a time where in discrimination. So I'll let you answer how you feel fit. We'll go with Jasmine first.
All right, I keep following Dr. Reed, so no, I'm playing. But just moved by his words.
You're doing good.
Yes.
You're doing good.
Yes, and so true. And we're still experiencing voter suppression to this day, right? So we see in Georgia where the voting rolls were being purged. We see in Michigan where we had people that were telling people that the polls were closed or you were supposed to vote a different day. In the last 10 years, we've had 38 state legislatures that have passed voter suppression laws. So obviously, it is still a huge issue. Another issue with the voter suppression is that it's not just nowadays, asking us how many bubbles are in a bar of soap, but it's also getting ingrained in our heads as we're on Facebook and trying to get us disengaged from the process. So, voter suppression is it no longer, as Dr. Reed said, is the sheet, and there are a lot of us that are actually actors in the voter suppression in terms of, instead of encouraging our brothers and sisters to go and vote, we encourage them not to, or why would you vote? So, there's so much work to do in this space. There's so much that has been done, and there's such a reason to want to vote. But, in terms of voter suppression, we have to continue to get out. We have to mobilize. We have to get registered. We have to run for offices. And we also have to give people a reason to want to vote, right? So you can't suppress something. We saw that in Georgia, recently. We saw that across America in our last election. And that's not, and I think that our last election was about a lot more than politics. As our new president said, it was about the soul of the nation. And as we saw on January 6th, where we had an insurrection at our United States Capitol, a Capitol that I have walked past. I am a graduate of Howard University, so I've spent a lot of time in the nation's capital, and I, to this day, do not know how that happened, but I know that it happened in our state capital here in Michigan, and it happens across the country. And so we are not safe, but getting back to that, are we free or are we living in a state of fear? All of that all goes together. So, it's really up to us to overcome that fear. And there are real reasons to be afraid. But we have to know that there is power in our vote. And John Lewis told us that, repeatedly, and we see it. We had a lot of power in our vote, and now we have an opportunity to have real change.
Wow, there's so many places that I can go with it. I do want to provide or uncover a piece of the undercurrent that I don't think we often talk about when we talk about voter suppression. We often talk about how hard states and elected officials make it for marginalized communities to vote. But we talk about suppression when we want people to cast their vote, but suppression also exists after the vote is cast. So we have to work even harder to protect the vote. What we saw in the city of Detroit after the presidential election at the Central Counting Board was in fact a disruption to the process that our democracy brings us, even in tabulating the votes. And so all across the United States of America, Black epicenters were delivering for the Biden and Harris campaign in cities like Detroit and Philly, Atlanta, Baltimore, all of these, epicenters of that have a tremendous amount of Black people who mobilized to vote. And so when they could not keep us home, they banged on the windows. And I'm there covering it as a journalist, banging on the windows, yelling, "Stop the vote, stop the steal." Challengers in the Central Counting Board being absolutely completely disruptive to volunteers, residents that look like you and I, residents that look like Dr. Reed, residents that have been volunteering since the 60s, right? That ushered in a new wave of Black political power in the city of Detroit, with Coleman Young at the forefront, scared around what these people will do. So not only do we have to work to get to the ballot box to vote, we have to protect the vote. We have to hold our elected officials accountable. When we talk about suppression in Michigan, you should see how the legislative maps are drawn. Gerrymandering is a huge issue that we have to overcome, to use the words, the theme of the movement in the state of Michigan and around the country. The very last thing that I would say is on this fear or freedom front. And I think that, and I want to acknowledge the civil rights movement of the 50s, of the 60s, of the 70s, and it continues today. But I also want to pinpoint how young the actors of the movement were, how young Dr. King was, how young John Lewis was. These were young people going against the respectability politics of even their parents who feared for their lives. And I am seeing the same thing happen today. We have a generation that's coming up, and Generation Z, and on the younger piece of the millennial generation, that do not subscribe to the respectability politics of fear. They do not subscribe to being quiet, and they do not subscribe to, oh, I'm gonna just stay in my place and stay in my lane. We witnessed, on the heels of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and so many other names that will be here all day, a wave of young people marching in movement and in lockstep with folks from around the world. We saw protests and marches in record numbers from around the world, just saying, don't kill me. Right? Because what we're still seeing, we don't see the capes. You're right, Dr. Reed, we see them in suits. This is state-sanctioned violence. Police are employees of a city, a municipality, a state. Continual state-sanctioned violence against Black bodies. And we see a generation that, even in the midst of knowing how police will respond to a nonviolent protest or a violent protest, risk their lives all summer long. In Detroit, we had 100 contiguous days of protesting all summer long to advocate for Black life, to just ask the police, who is sworn to protect and serve us, not to kill us. Just don't kill us. That's all we're asking. And so I do believe we are in a place of freedom. That freedom looks like many different things. And I don't think as the generations progress that we will regress backwards into fear. we are trudging right along.
Thank you, Jasmine and Orlando. So, Orlando, you left off talking about young people and how they're becoming involved in marches and protests and things like that. I would ask Reverend Webb, what advice or encouragement can you give to young people who want to get involved or who are involved to keep them moving the cause forward?
The advice that I would give, that I give regularly, is to do what we did and not look at it as the old way of doing things. We were taught to strategize. We were taught to strategize. And this is what even young people must do, strategize. And after strategizing, organize. And once you get it organized, then it's time to mobilize. And these are the things that we're trying to get across to the young people. You don't have to jump right in on it because you'll miss it that way. That's just like playing baseball. If you're swinging at the air, you're not going to hit a ball. And this is how we're teaching them. We're not going to swing at the air, but we're going to wait for that ball to come and hit that ball right out of the court. John Lewis said, vote always. Your vote matters. People are continuing to gain the right to vote. I even had people calling me from Georgia, all over Georgia, to become a part of the telephone canvassing. And I did that to help turn Georgia blue. We just can't stay in our own little private areas here in Alabama, in Birmingham. But as soon as they called me and asked me to get involved over in Georgia, you know what? Even though being my age, I said, look, don't expect for me to come there all the time, but give me a list to make telephone calls. Young people is what I will continue to say to them. Stay involved, get involved, stay involved, but do it the right way. Not violently, but non-violently. And we'll always hit that ball.
Thank you. I think that's some very timely advice. And I do agree with you that sometimes when people think about the way that things were done, they do try and make it the old way, but it was effective. And I think that we have the opportunity to just take it just a little bit further. And I remember in the film, they talked about John Lewis's blueprint, and it was phrased as organize, mobilize. And then there's this other piece, legislate, right? And somehow he was able to go from being an activist, from being, a protester and being that strategist and working in the civil rights movement to actually being in an office where he had the ability to affect change and change laws, right? So as we think about that, and what you've known, Dr. Reed, about him as a person, how was he able to navigate that? Because I think that's a fear of a lot of people. If you're marching and you're an advocate, right? How do you join up and become, I think as it was phrased, somebody said to him, he became a bureaucrat. How do you still remain true to yourself and to your principles, even if you decide to take on elected office?
You got to unmute, Dr. Reed.
Stand by your own principles. When we started the city movement in the 1960s, and I'm glad you brought that out, that this was a young folks movement. The young folks movement. But we had senior citizens, we had adults, and everybody backing us. When we went to Raleigh, North Carolina to organize SNCC in the Easter weekend in 1960, that week, the money that we used to get there, Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy and others gave us our money from Montgomery into Raleigh, North Carolina. So we had help, and we got the Dr. King was there. He spoke to us, rallied the troops. A lot of older people were there. Fred Shuttlesworth, Reverend Billups were there in Raleigh. We had that. So we had a lot of help. So you organize, move forward. Don't turn anybody away. Let all flowers bloom. Beckon everybody and hope that you can keep some of them with you, because the movement gets so big and it gets so tough, you can't do it by yourself. And this is one of the things that John Lewis was able to do. John Lewis could work with other people. He could work with other people. And that's very important. Be able to get along, work, and strategize, and go back, organize, and of course, naturally, mobilize. That has to be done jointly with everybody. And that's what John Lewis did. John Lewis had a rare courage. Now that was John Lewis's long suit. He had a rare courage. And it didn't bother what happened. It didn't bother him. He was going to pursue it, and he was willing to suffer the consequences. And he suffered so much. He suffered so much. Beaten, kicked, and all. But then when he went to Congress, he didn't forget it. He didn't get happy with what I call the proverbial fish sandwich. Oftentimes, we get people elected to office. And what happens once they take the oath? First of all, they think they did it by themselves. Secondly, once they get there, they are so glad to get involved with the, quote, the big boys. They forget the little boys and the little girls who put them there. John Lewis never forgot that. And that is so crucial. That is so crucial, because I can tell you something. The fight goes on. Just this past week, we had to sue the Democratic Party of Alabama on Thursday, because blacks have gotten control of the Democratic Party in Alabama, because white people left the Democratic Party and gone to the Republican Party. So blacks got control. We have a majority of blacks on the Central Committee. But what happened? A former senator, guy with Perez, and what? Took the control, would not recognize a group that the blacks had, the regular party. Didn't recognize, and recognize a caucus as a Democratic Party of Alabama now. So we're in federal court now fighting that issue. But what I'm saying, the war goes on. I've said over and over again, don't forget this. The Civil War ended in 1865. But they just stopped shooting.
Yeah.
That's all. They just stopped shooting. We are still having a fight. Look what happened at our Capitol last week. Look what happened at our Capitol last week. And who was it led by? Who pushed it? Who orchestrated it? So the war goes on. But we have to go on too. For justice.
Thank you for that, Dr. Reed. So very, very true. You know, wow. Now I feel like Jasmine. There's nothing else that I can say. That thank you for those comments. But I do want to offer Glenn the opportunity to just talk about leadership and about, you know, what are some of the challenges that you see right now when it comes to leadership for a lot of different causes, but particularly when we're talking about civil rights.
That means somebody else? I don't know. Oh, I yield to you. I didn't know, but I have a comment, but I yield to somebody else. Somebody else want to say something.
Yeah. So the what happens is when we're talking about leadership and what's happening right now, it is interesting because I think Jasmine mentioned it earlier. Like there are actors, right, that operate in certain leadership roles, right, and it's people that are not really in positions of leadership that really actually benefit the masses of people, right? And we're in a time where, and I think this has always happened, especially within the Black community, but people like orators, right? Like people that can speak very well. But just because a person can speak well, or even just because a person is the loudest, doesn't mean they're the most effective, right? And I think where Martin Luther King and John Lewis and people like that were powerful is because people understood their roles within a movement, right? If you can draw your role in a movement might be to draw the attention to it, but your role might not be the person to actually sit at the table and negotiate, right? Or your role might not be the person to actually be out there at the march, but you might be the person in the back room making the calls, or you might be the person that can sit down with the legislator and actually say what the people are actually talking about and what they're drawing attention to. Or you might be the individual that's good at organizing people and helping to send volunteers out. I think we need to rethink the way that leadership looks within when it's coming to strategize and mobilizing and understanding our roles. And I think the better that we can do that, instead of trying to be the orator all the time, right, is understand where is my strength and actually how can I move the benefit of all people, right, rather than just my personal goal of me wanting to be recognized, right, or for me to be separated out in some type of class. It's almost like classism has came into the leadership of the Black community, where it's like, let me be the one that sits at the table. And the thing is that a table
conversation, Glenn. We going there?
Oh yeah, we've definitely had that conversation. Yeah, yep, absolutely. And but it's about understanding your role, playing your position, and understanding that it's about the whole, it's about everyone. And I think John Lewis said that in the movie. It was about helping everybody, right? It's not about you individually. So if people listen to John Lewis and that's the person that people want to follow because he can speak, then you jump behind John Lewis, right? Because he's the one that's getting the attention, but doesn't mean he's going to be the ones making all the decisions, right? But it's understanding that. And I think Mr. Reed mentioned that earlier about, a person speaking. How did he say that? You said something about a person speaking and being able to have the balance between both sides, right? Everybody doesn't have that ability. So I think leadership looks differently, and we need to respect the roles that we all play, whether if that's marketing, media, volunteering, any of those particular roles, even if it's typing letters, whatever your gift is, and using that for the benefit of people and running after that goal. So because the person that's out front, it might always look great, but when something go negative, that's who they going after to try to, anything negative, they're coming after that person. So.
Thank you for those thoughts, Glenn. And I think everything that's being said is resonating with those that are listening. Seeing a lot in the comments. And there are a couple of questions, and I'm going to consider them to be rhetorical questions right now. But, who are our Ella Bakers? Who is our modern day Jim Lawson? Somebody said, where is our modern day Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party? And I think that there is a yearning and a desire for there to be some strong leadership and for people to know who they should be following so that they can do what Glenn said, find out, know, and understand their role so they can join in. And I think that's been something that's just kind of been an ongoing struggle because of something that Glenn said about, there are times when everybody wants to be the one out front getting the credit, but it's not always those folks. And I think somebody said it in the chat. The face isn't the force, and how can we develop more forces? But by the same token, who is the face, right? And who should we be following? So I see that Orlando unmuted. So is there something you'd like to say or something that you'd like to add?
I just wanted to cement Glenn's points and say that the movement has many different arms. And because I am the finger, it doesn't mean that I have to disparage somebody who's the arm, right? Or the foot. And I think that we are figuring that out. Even in the city of Detroit, we see animosity sometimes between activists and who should be out front. But I think if everyone respected everybody else's role, so it's not just playing your role, but respecting somebody else's role who may be different. We don't suffer. We suffer because of bad strategy sometimes, right? And so it is of no surprise that John Lewis moved on to be a legislator. We need people everywhere. And it's up to us not to turn our back and say, oh, he's a part of the system. No, let's figure out how we can protect him in his position and get the things done and passed that we need passed, because he's the legislator, right? We're marching, so we could be loud and boisterous. Agitation is a tenet of advocacy and protesting, but who's the person that gets to go in and talk to the president of city council or talk to the president of that county? And so not only playing your role in the movement, but respecting other roles that differ from yours, because they're not doing it how you do it, doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And the last thing I want to talk about is this yearning for leadership. And I believe, history shows us that the civil rights movement, the nonviolent movement, SNCC and Martin Luther King, though there were so many leaders that came out of that, but there were other movements toward Black liberation and marginalized people's liberation that were going on at the same time that another subset of people subscribed to. Movements toward liberation, especially for marginalized and Black people, have always been multifaceted. We got leaders everywhere, right? With respect to the Reverend James Lawson. We have strategists everywhere with respect to the person who brought up Ella Baker. We have people who start organizations and organize people. Stacey didn't win, but that was the worst thing that Brian Kemp could do, was try to steal that Georgia election, because she's on his head, right? Starting a new movement of voter organizing. And so I think that we could learn from that. We can learn from folks who are humble, don't have the ego, this big ego, and respect everybody else in their role in the movement.
I think that's a very valid point. And I think sometimes we talk about.
You won't hurt us to shine. That's right, lady.
We got this little activist, right? Here you go. Watch your foot. So sometimes we think about the names of important figures in history, and I don't know that they had necessarily that recognition in their time and in their season. And so when we reflect back and we think about these various names, right, we're thinking about it in today's time, and we're thinking about all of the great things that happen. And I think there are so many people right now that are doing great things, that are leaders, that are making progress. And some of that won't be realized for another 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right? So I just want to offer that the leadership is there and it is growing, and young people are coming up as well. But we just may not realize their impact in the moment that it's happening. And I know that Dr. Reed would like to say something, so go ahead. Oops.
What you are doing, you are carrying a message. You are a spokesperson. So everybody would not occupy the stage at the same time. There are leaders everywhere, and I'm just listening to all of you while you talk, and you can tell I've been around a good little while. And I was listening to all of you, and all of you are doing good. So you are leaders in your own right now, and as time moves on, you will grow, people get to know you. But right now, you are leaders as we speak. And I'm just proud of it, and I'm glad to be on this program with you. And one of the things that I would say, and I'll stop, one is that leaders got to lead by examples. Got to lead by example. So people got to have confidence in you. And there's another saying we use around in Alabama, I use it a lot. You can't send a lunch by a hungry boy, he'll eat it. So you can't have leaders out there who pretend to be leaders trying to feather their own nest. John Lewis didn't do that. John Lewis looked out for what I call big man Junebug, Bubba, and Cuda. He looked out for the little people. And a leader has to live by examples. And the best person you can look to for that example is what Jesus did. That's what Jesus did. He looked out for the least of these.
And, I almost slipped in a quick amen. Totally agree with you. You have to lead by example and think about other people, not just yourself. It's so easy. And somebody said it in the chat, to get caught up in your own ego and advancing your own cause. But if we're really leading something, we're not only representing ourselves, we're representing those that have either chosen to follow us or who are looking to us for that leadership. So thank you for those comments. And in the film, Diane Nash talked about the unity and the power and the strength that was seen. She was talking in particular about Nashville, but I think it relates to the entire civil rights movement. And I'll just ask Reverend Webb, are you seeing that unity, power, and strength today?
I am in some instances, to be absolutely honest. Mr. Reed, look, he's got me, Joe. I'm getting ready to license you. You preached about that today. What we need to do, and I was sitting here thinking about that. A lot of young people are being left out because, in the way that some tried to leave us out, but you're never too young to make a difference. Never too young to make a difference. All parts work to make an automobile run. And those were the things that John Lewis always tried to get across to people, to all of us. We're never too young to learn. Am I seeing it? Yes, in some instances. But when you're trying to hold an individual back, when they're trying to be involved to make a difference, then change for a lot of things and a lot of us will never come. And so I'm saying this, and I hope that others are listening to it all over, that you're never, and John Lewis said this all the time, you're never too young to make a difference. And yes, I'm seeing it. We're just going to have to see more of it.
And I would also say that while you're never too young, you're also never too old. And so I think that there is a great deal of wisdom that has already been shared today. And so we appreciate everybody's participation. And I think that, it's just important for us to recognize, where we've been, where we are, and then where we're going. One of the things that's just very timely is that we've just completed the 2020 census. And as part of that process, the year following the census, there is the redistricting process that takes place. And I know I'll let Dr. Reed start this just because of your experience. I read that in the 70s and the 80s, you were part of filing lawsuits and being active in that redistricting process. And as late as 2011, were involved in a lawsuit against the city of Montgomery for failing to change the districts. And can you just share with us, why is that so important? Why should people, care about that? It's a process that most people don't even consider or don't even think about, but how does that affect us in our voting rights?
Thank you. What I found in my involvement in drawing district lines, when Montgomery went from mayor council form of government, from a commission form of government to a mayor council form of government, the district lines were drawn by some people at the University of Alabama. And there will be 9 city council members. They drew 2 majority black city council districts. And when I looked at that, and some others looked at it, I wasn't the only one. We had a meeting to strategize, if you will, please. And we talked about that. These lines are drawn to cut us out. We're about nearly 40% of the population. We're going to get only 2 districts. So I went into court. But then in the meantime, I also came home and got my little the adding machine started picking out my own number. I started drawing my own plan. That's what I'm headed for. You can't let the other folks do it for you. You have to do it yourself. I drew the plan. When the deal went down, when I finished, we didn't have 2. We had 4. We had 4 out of 9. And right now, the next time around, we're going to have 5 or 6 out of 9. But be prepared to draw your own plan. You can't rely on other folks to do it for you, because as long as they are drawing them, they're going to draw you out. If you draw your plan, you draw yourself in. That's so important, because that's where the representation comes. That's where the representation comes. I ran for the legislature in 1970. Didn't realize that the district line was drawn, so I couldn't win. That's when I started drawing my own line. And consequently, I started drawing for the whole state of Alabama. So we went from just a few blacks in the legislature, and Alabama is the only state in the nation where the population in the legislature reflects. We got 20, Alabama's about 26% black, and we got 26% of the House members black, and we also have the same thing in the Senate. Want to make it draw your own plan, because he who draws the plan or she who draws the plan will draw it to fit them and their interest. My interest were black folk. I don't apologize for it. Mine was very simple. I don't apologize for it. And so I drew district lines so blacks have equity. And I didn't try to take all of them, but I got my fair share. And it passed, the legislation passed the courts, and we have that right now. So the key to reapportionment is to draw your own plan. And if you don't draw one, get you somebody around you who can help you, but you draw those district lines yourself. That's the only thing I can tell you to do about reapportionment, because if they're going to shut you out every time if you don't draw it yourself.
I like what you just said about drawing your own plan. And I just want to offer the opportunity to the community. I know that somebody just put in the chat, how do we get our plan considered before decisions are made? And right now, the state of Michigan is going through this process. There was a volunteer committee put together, and basically anybody in the state could apply. And essentially they were randomly selected to be a part of this redistricting committee. And Communities First was actually selected of one of, I believe, about 20 nonprofit organizations to help educate the public about redistricting. And then also there's a part in there that says, draw your maps and submit them to the commission. Now, I don't say that I'm an expert on any of this, and I have much to learn. And hopefully Dr. Reed will be a resource for us on how to go about that. But we definitely want to make sure that we're engaged and involved, because these are the things that are happening behind the scenes that are now at the forefront. We have an opportunity to engage. We have an opportunity to learn, and we can be a part of that process of making sure that there is fairness, that there is equity, and that there is proper representation. So thank you for that, Dr. Reed, and we'll look to you for some guidance on that. Earlier in the conversation, Jasmine mentioned, about how we should be involved and how we should be engaged. And one of those things was running for office. So I want to just talk a little bit about that. Jasmine, what has been your experience working on campaigns? And, in the case of a win, right? Everybody looks at the glory and looks at, you're in control, you're in charge, you're a representative, but, give us both sides of that if you could.
It's always good to have the win, right? But politics is hard, right? You're not going to win every election. But the key thing, and I think that we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is how do you move from being an advocate or a candidate to being, now you've been elected and now it's time for governance. And so I think that you wear a couple of different hats, many different hats as an elected official. And we saw that with Representative Lewis in the film, when he would stop to take the time to talk to everybody in the airport, to talk to everybody as he was walking into the congressional building, Having those moments with your constituents is that humbling moment to make sure that you have that self-check. You know, we talked about how people are putting themselves out there, you know, I want to be the leader, you know, playing your role. But there's also those people that are behind the scenes that have to help, you know, keep you grounded once you make it into office, right? You're not there to serve yourself, you're there to serve the public. And so being able to engage with your community and making sure that the reason that you're there is to serve the community and not to be self-serving, those are all very important. And so just in my experience, I would say that there are mountaintop moments and there are valley moments. In the valleys, you know, you can't recognize the mountaintop without those valley moments. And so recognizing and taking time, you know, our elected officials need to, and we have to as well, you know, we have to hold them accountable. But also the part that we have to do is we have to give them the opportunity to serve. You know, we're what, let's see, 3 days in basically to the Biden administration, and people are expecting, you know, this man to do the work of the Lord. And while I think that he is a good Christian man, I don't know that he is a saint, right? So I don't know that he's able to move mountains, especially if we're putting a lot of the barriers in place in front of him. So we have to give people the opportunity to get into office, to learn the office. You know, a lot of times we're electing people that have never been elected to a political position. They might be being an advocate or a community organizer is much different being the mayor of the city of Detroit. Being an advocate here in Flint for the water crisis is much different than being a state legislature. And so having a great understanding and grasp of what you're running for and understanding why you're running for that. But as well, we have to make sure that our constituency understands what those people's responsibilities are, because often people are elected to offices and we hold them responsible for something that they have no control over. So, you know, there's you know, and I've talked about this with my friends, with my family, that we have to do. We talked earlier again in this conversation about moving past the election. I think somebody put it in the comments, you know, we have all of this excitement around elections. And so 2020, we had all this excitement and we're trying to get you to vote and get you to vote. But, you know, now what, right? So how do we continue to keep the electorate engaged in the process? And that is very much the responsibility of the elected officials, but that's also the responsibility of the community to keep ourselves engaged. So I'm just going to stop there. As Dr. Reed would say, I'm gonna stop myself. But I could talk for days about this, but we just need to make sure that we continue to be involved in the process. When you talk about, I was gonna say gerrymandering, but that's not the right thing. When you talk about redistricting, that's part of the governance process, right? So maintaining that engagement, maintaining relationships, getting on committees, understanding what those committees are, getting on boards, and being curious, you know, leaning in and not being afraid. So we talked about the fear and freedom. So not being afraid to be a part of the process. And here's the thing, when we let people in that haven't been in the door before, we need to give them some grace when they get there as well. So when we bring people into the political process, we don't need to be upset like, who was your civics teacher in high school? Because you don't know how any of this is working. Hey, maybe we got to hold the civics class, you know, at lunchtime to catch them up to speed on something that they missed in a broken educational system because we didn't get out to vote. And so we had Betsy DeVos in there dismantling our system. So, and it's not just her, you know, the system was dismantled far before that. But I'm just saying, when we bring people along, we just need to offer that grace. We need to make sure we give that grace, extend that grace to our political people, to people that are just working in the field as well. They get, and Facebook and social media are instruments for change. They shouldn't be instruments to deconstruct our communities as well.
And I would also say that they shouldn't be our only source of education, right? A lot of the things that we do see on social media are not true and not accurate. So we also have to be cautious and careful about that. And your comment about, we need the civics class. Communities First has been having conversation about, how can we do more to help people understand the political system, understand how change actually happens? How do we get back to a place where we can truly strategize for causes and things that we care about as a community? One of our biggest failures, I think, just as a society, is expecting things to change and we never bring attention to the problem. But then when we bring attention to the problem, we don't offer potential solutions, right? And so we can't expect people who don't understand us or don't understand our concern to manufacture an answer for us. We have to be strategic enough to go in and have that conversation. And, and I would also say just not being satisfied with just having the seat at the table, right? Glenn talks about it all the time about how do we expand the table? How do we add seats for other people who need to be present because they're not being represented? And I'll let him maybe speak on that just a little bit.
Yeah, just when you were talking about the table, and I'll just talk about this equity thing. It's like sometimes we have to realize is when we cry about equity or cry about being at the table, the thing is that some people are just mad that they're not benefiting like other people are benefiting at the table, right? So equity is not about you getting to the table and you benefiting. Equity and including people and coming to the table is getting to the table and then remembering what you're there for. Like the prize is not the table. The prize is the negotiation, is the conversation, right? Sometimes some people, and I can probably say people that's probably watching this podcast, and I don't know who, but sometimes people invite you to the table just to shut you up because they know when they bring you to the table, it's certain things that you're not going to say. There's certain things because you're happy to be there, right? I don't get invited to the table oftentimes because people know they're going to be challenged, right? I'm going to ask a question or I'm going to say something that does not maybe fit your particular way about the way that you want to do things. But a diversity of thought, right, is what really why change can happen, right? So it's getting to the table, understanding why you're there, and it's bringing things. And if you get to a table and you don't know how to, and this is the other thing, if you get to a table and you don't know what to do, it's okay with dropping back. And if you know somebody else knows more information about that and putting somebody else in that place, that's the other thing about being at the table, is also being a leader. When we talk about where the leaders are, is recognizing when you're in spaces that you might not know how to actually get the information clearly across to actually change something. So don't just sit at the table just to say I'm there if you're not really moving. But say if I know Orlando and I know Orlando would be better at this table because this is something that he is powerful and dynamic and people trust me, I need to pick up the phone and call Orlando. Even if me and Orlando don't even get along, right? I'm saying we do, but even if me and Orlando don't get along, just right. I'm gonna call him and say, Orlando, there's this table that I'm at, but I think you would be dope to sit here because I know that your heart is around moving our people, not about our individual feelings or whatever thought process, because it's about the movement of people. So the other thing is some people are just upset when it comes to the inequity, right? Is that people want to benefit from the inequity, right? So it's just like if you getting something and you complaining about it, that I don't get this, or we don't get this, and then you get a piece of it, and then you forget to complain for the other people that you said you were complaining for. So it's about not just your need getting met, it's about all the people that look like you and everybody that's in your situation to make sure their needs are getting met, right? So that's about what truly equity is, and about the table, and not bringing people around that's going to agree with you or people that are, I'm sorry, I can talk about that, but I'll call Orlando about that later.
I'm hopeful that this is one of many conversations that we can have, because there's been such a richness in conversation and the questions that have come in, and even the comments that we've seen in the chat. So what I would like to say is we want to offer a $50 gift card, a drawing for a $50 gift card. Everybody who comments doesn't get a gift card. Just want to put that out there for sharing one thing that you got out of today's conversation. And then if you could share the film link with someone else so that they can benefit from the content. So please do that. We'll enter you into a drawing honor system on sharing the link. We trust you. And we'll do a drawing for a $50 gift card. As we prepare to conclude, the statement that resonated throughout the film, and John Lewis said this in a couple of different ways, but it was essentially speak up, speak out, get into what I call good trouble, necessary trouble, do what is right. And I'm just going to ask everybody, how is that resonating for you right now? What are you doing to get into good trouble? And we can start with Orlando.
I got to tell you, I'm always in trouble. My mouth gets me in trouble. I am a facilitator, a podcast host, facilitating local and national conversations. And I'm not shy about standing up for equity. I'm not shy about standing up for social justice. And oftentimes, I get myself in trouble with, any and everybody, especially the political structure here in the city of Detroit. Yeah, I said it. The mayoral administration and we bump heads often. But, he said get into good trouble, speak up, speak out. But one of the things that he kept saying that I sort of now see as prophetic was that our democracy, or we will lose our democracy. And John Lewis knew, Reverend Webb, just how fragile the democracy is and was. And we came pretty close on January the 6th. And so John Lewis knew what the result of inaction would be. John Lewis knew what the result of mis and disinformation would be. It could cost us our democracy. And so I'm a believer of our democracy. I'm a believer of the democratic process. I saw it firsthand at the Central Accounting Board. And so I'm going to speak up. I'm going to speak out. I'm going to continue to be loud. I'm going to continue to, get in that good trouble, even though it may not always be politically expedient. That's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. My truth, my journalism is my activism.
And Reverend Webb, tell us what you're doing these days to get into some good trouble.
I'm very happy that you asked. I'm so glad to be on this podcast with you young people. And I asked a lot of the young people, why are you always pulling me into that? They said, well, because Reverend Webb, you don't mind getting into good trouble. But what I'm doing now, and I just came out of an election. My attorney, who is a young Black male, he has never been one to run for office. I said, but I'm running you for the mayor of a city that is 102 years old. Orlando, Glenn, Jasmine, the city is 102 years old, never had a Black mayor. And my attorney was never involved in politics. Needless to say to you quickly, what am I doing? I'm glad you asked. I ran him for mayor of this city that had never had a Black mayor in 102 years. Didn't have a Black police chief. Good trouble. Just throw your hands up and shout, hallelujah, we won it. We won that race. So now that city of 102 years has the first Black mayor, which is a young man, like you young men are. And we ran 2 Black females for city council, and good trouble. And Orlando, I'm like you are. I can't keep my mouth closed. So, but I speak like you and all of you do. I speak truth to power. And this is what we're going to have to continue to do, even at a ripe old age. I will continue to do it. You continue to pray for me. And if I may even say this, You were talking about who do you have sitting at the table? Young folks, I preached a sermon, and that sermon is and was, you better know who you invite to the table. You better know who you have sitting at the table. Jesus had Judas sitting at the table, didn't he? But he knew who Judas was sitting at that table. But he had something to do. Now, continue to pray with me, pray for me, because there's still going to be some tables that I'm going to sit at, but they're going to be asking me up from the table. Thank you so much, Ms. Essence Wilson, Ms. Jasmine McKinney, Mr. Orlando P. Bailey, Mr. Glenn Wilson. I hope this will not be our last conversation or meeting together, because there's so much work we need to continue to do. I'm still doing it as long as God allow me to have breath in my body. There's some new things on the horizon, so call me so I can tell you what it is.
I love the teaser. Now we have to call and follow up. I want to know. Jasmine, how are you getting into good trouble?
So I am getting into good trouble. When I was young, I used to get into hood trouble, but now I'm getting into good trouble. By day, I help small businesses, specifically businesses that are socially and economically disadvantaged, with accessing opportunities in the government marketplace. And so I get into good trouble with that, helping to boost our economic development in the city, in our region, and in our state. And then on the side, I plan to be very involved in our upcoming city council elections, encouraging. I am not running for office, so no, but I will be behind the scenes, making sure that we get the vote out, making sure that we have quality people that are running. And I'm really excited for this year for the city of Flint, and hoping to get some new blood on the city council, and keeping some people on the council as well. So stay tuned. I'm like that Reverend Whip.
I would say that, I would love to see you run for office, but by the same token, your role is what we have been talking about. And if that's to be behind the scenes and to make it happen for others and to be supportive, then your efforts are worthwhile and greatly appreciated. So,
but sometimes you are called upon. And I was saying this to a friend the other day, because that's the other thing I'm doing. I'm trying to convince people to run for office. Sometimes when the call is great, it has to be considered. It is a level of personal sacrifice. Reverend Webb said it about her attorney. He wasn't thinking about it, but he was called. He was called upon. So when the people need you, Miss McKinney, we need you. Think about it.
Oh, no. I'm going on mute.
You know what? We're about to all be in trouble.
Right. That's a classic one. I muted myself.
All right, Glenn, we're going to let you wrap up. We're going to ask you to tell us how you're getting into good trouble.
Oh, wow.
And to also give a thank you to our sponsors. And thank you, Jasmine, for all that you're doing behind the scenes. And, keep an open mind. That's all we'll say.
She still stayed on mute. Her face ain't even changed. She's just like, no, I'm all right. I'm good. Yeah, but what am I doing to stay in good trouble? I'm in trouble a lot, actually. So I'm in trouble because I'm always challenging thought processes, always challenging this, the status quo. I'm getting into trouble because I might challenge political processes, scoring criteria for certain funding, things when it comes to, trying to open up opportunities for minority developers, either in for-profit or nonprofit space. I'm working on, housing and trying to remove barriers for people that are in poverty, to try to move people to a place of self-sufficiency, trying to really battle the whole economic opportunity situation, and I'm not trying. I mean, these are actually things that I'm doing. But one thing that I can think about that happened in the movie that I think is very important, and it's always a reminder. But when John Lewis, I don't know if everybody remembers close to the beginning of the movie, well, it might have been towards the first 25 minutes, but it was a part when he said he wanted to get into a university, and he sent Dr. Martin Luther King a letter, and never met Dr. Martin Luther King a day in his life. And Dr. Martin Luther King responded with a letter, sent him a first class bus ticket is what he called it, to send for John Lewis to come visit him in Alabama. And when he got there, he said that, it was him and Abernathy. And he said he was so, scared. And when he asked him what his name was, Martin Luther King, asked that to John Lewis. He said he told him his whole full name, felt like it was one of the parents, like an authority figure. And that was a reminder, just continually for me, which I always try to do, is to not be so untouchable, to not be so important, to not be so forget where you come from, who you're there to serve, and to remember the people after you. And I think that the other good trouble that I can continually get in is to try to be that access point for people to call me, for people to reach out to me, for me to give people an encouraging word. And if somebody needs a space to be open for them, that I be available to use any resource or anything that I have, or use my voice or advocacy to open up spaces for other people, not just the spaces that I'm trying to open, but I can call a university, or I can call and open up a space for someone. So those are the things that I'm gonna continue to do to get in good trouble and build other good friendships, right? To help me get in other good trouble with other people, right? So I think, you get in good trouble with, with your network to help move things around. So let me go ahead and make sure I thank our sponsors who helped this event happen. This was so great, is all I have to say. And for us to make this movement to the 6th annual African American Film Series virtually, I think we had, a couple hundred people or so sign up for the film. Looking forward to getting back in the theater, here hopefully in the next season, so we can keep packing it out. But I want to thank our sponsors, which is HAP, Community Foundation of Greater Flint, Mott Community College, Flint Institute of Arts, Kettering University, Genesee Health Systems, and NBC 25, and a whole host of other sponsors that help support this event. Hopefully that you're seeing the impact that this event is happening. And people, I ask you to do one thing. When this video is over, it's still going to be live, right? So the other thing that you can do to get in some good trouble is to share this video, share this content, follow us on social media if you're not. Get this information out to as many people as possible, because it does us no good if we're just being selfish with the information. It does us a lot better if we pass that along to others. So thank you so much for joining us. Essence, is there anything else that you want to add? But this was very exciting.
I just want to thank again our panelists for being with us and for sharing such rich and important information. So thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Reverend Webb, Orlando, who had to step out, and of course, Dr. Reed. This was more than I could have hoped for. And I know that Lori Ross on our team used her connections and her network to get Reverend Webb and to get Dr. Reed. And I'm so glad that we were able to do this virtually, because that gave us access to people to be on a panel that we normally wouldn't have had travel to Flint for, a 40-minute discussion after a film in the evening on a Thursday night. So this has gone far better than we could have expected. So thank you for that. And I also want to invite people to our next film, which is Fast Colors, and that will be February 18th through the 21st. And it's located at the same link. It's in the chat. You'll be able to find it in the comments. And that film is a science fiction thriller with a Black superhero, and she goes through homelessness. She has issues with family and all these things as she discovers the power that lies within her. So it should be a great film. Hope that you will join us for that and for the discussion that will take place related to that film. We appreciate all of you for watching. we'll pick our winner, give away our $50 gift card. And I just want to say again, thank you. And I am going to go back and watch the replay because there is so much more that I just want to glean from this. And I have extra questions, but fortunately I have the email addresses and phone numbers of the panelists, so I can get my questions answered. If anybody out there that's listening has questions, you can always send those to us and we'll do our best to get those answered and help you to make those connections. So thank you all, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.